NASCAR has had several African Americans participate in each of its series for its entire 70-year existence. Drivers like Bubba, Wallace, and Wendell Scott have entered NASCAR and have done wonders in the sport. Some might even say that they have broken barriers in history. To begin this journey, let's start off with the first African American to make a NASCAR start. And no, it wasn't Wendell Scott, it was actually a guy named Charlie Scott. Charlie Scott began his first NASCAR race at Daytona Beach, Florida. In a field of 76 cars, he started 14th and he finished 19th in that whole race. Anyway, enough about Charlie Scott, let's move on to Wendell. Wendell Scott started driving in 1961, and immediately everyone started becoming racist against him. But even before he even got to that race, he had to make his own car and buy his own equipment. He didn't have help from anybody. In that start, Wendell Scott had a problem on lap 52.
Old fairground track. And we left home that morning, just my father and I. And he come down there and they had advertised he was gonna be there, and a lot of people there just to see this Negro driver. But we had some mechanical problems that day, blew an engine or something, and we finished out of when we had a failure.
In case if you don't know what happened, Wendell Scott had an oil pressure failure in lap 52 of that 200 lap event. Scott finished 17th of 18 cars that day. This first start would lead to something great in the future. Getting back to breaking barriers in history, fast forward from 1961 to 1963, and Wendell Scott did just that.
We're about to witness history. Wendell Scott is about to become the first Negro driver to win a NASCAR race.
Yep, on December 1st, 1963, history would change forever. Wendell Scott won his first NASCAR Grand National Series race at the time at Jacksonville Speedway. In a field of 22 cars, he started 15th and finished in first. Besides that, nothing else really was historic for Wendell Scott in his NASCAR career. In Wendell Scott's final NASCAR start, he was actually driving for another team owner and driving with a separate sponsor. He drove for team owner Doc Faschina, and he drove with the sponsor Kmart Special. Another African American driver didn't race in NASCAR until 1984 when Willie T. Ribbs came along. In 1984, Willie T. Ribbs won the Paul Revere 250 at Daytona, and nothing much else. So let's move on to Bill Lester. Bill Lester only made 2 NASCAR Cup Series starts, and that's way back in 2006. One notable occurrence that happened to Bill Lester was that fans still booed him for racial reasons. By the time 2006 came along, you would think people would stop being racist, but that didn't happen at all. But anyway, not only did African Americans step into a race car in NASCAR, but they have also stepped into the business side of it. An African American woman by the name of Melissa Harville LeBron was the first African American woman to own a NASCAR team. But before Melissa did that, she took 2 of her sons to a NASCAR race at Charlotte Superspeedway in trying to convince them to not drive a race car. But that only gave her sons a bigger urge to drive race cars. When Melissa was at that race, she didn't see much diversity in drivers and in team owners, so she decided to make a change. She was a partial owner in 2 teams, one in the NASCAR Gander Outdoors Truck Series, and one in the Whelen Modified Series. Having 4 cars total, she put her sons in 2 of those cars. In fact, Harville LeBron is still a team owner today. And finally, we have NASCAR's most recent successful African-American driver, Darrell aka Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace is arguably the best African-American driver since Wendell Scott. Here's why. In 2010, Bubba Wallace began his NASCAR career in the K&N Series. In that season, he started winning off the bat, winning 2 races of the 10-race season that year, which, if you do the math, is a fifth of a season. Speed up to 2013, and Wallace went full-time in the Gander Outdoors Truck Series. And he actually won in that series, the 3rd-tier series of NASCAR. And what shocked me was that he won 5 races after that one, counting 6 wins in the NASCAR Gander Outdoors Truck Series. Bubba Wallace did compete in some races in the 2nd-tier series, but wasn't really able to contend there. In 2017, Bubba Wallace was tapped by Richard Petty to driving the number 43 for 4 races, substituting for their driver Eric Almirola. His best finish was 11th at Kentucky Speedway. In 2018, Bubba Wallace went full-time with Richard Petty Motorsports in the NASCAR Cup Series. What was surprising was what happened in the 2018 Daytona 500.
With the number 3 20 years ago, 20 years of trying for Earnhardt, he won the Daytona 500. Austin Dillon wins the 60th running of the...
While the 3-car won the race, Bubba Wallace ended up in a photo finish for 2nd place, beating 3rd place by just a nose. And in his post-race interview, you can bet that he was very emotional.
Noco rookie in the race today, but he's also the highest finishing African-American driver in the Great American Race. A 2nd place finish.
Come on now. I'm gonna talk like this. All right, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
I was going to say walk through the final laps, but forget the final laps. Walk through just the emotion of this moment for you right now.
If you heard what the interviewer said in the first clip, Bubba Wallace was the highest finishing African American in the Daytona 500 and the closest African American to win a race since 1963. There is no doubt that African Americans have proven themselves in the sport of NASCAR. Racing and driving those cars takes skill, as well as the business side where you bring those good cars to the racetrack. Each of these people have accomplished great things in the sport of NASCAR, and each of those accomplishments are great examples of breaking barriers in history.